Europe in flames. The roots of Krav Maga. Long before the world knew the name Krav Maga, long before modern academies, international certifications, and self-defense courses, Europe was living through one of the darkest periods in its history. To understand the birth of this martial art, one must abandon any idea of Eastern tradition, ancient temples, or spiritualized philosophy. Krav Maga wasn't born from a quest to perfect the body or mind. It was born from a brutal necessity: survival. We are talking about the beginning of the 20th century, a period marked by economic crises, political instability, and a rapid growth of anti-Semitism in Central and Eastern Europe. Regions such as Hungary, Austria, Poland, and especially Czechoslovakia became hostile territories for Jewish communities. Attacks, persecutions, and lynchings were not the exception. They were part of everyday life. Unlike Asian martial arts, which developed over centuries in relatively structured environments, Krav Maga began to take shape in dirty streets, dark alleys, and real confrontations where there were no rules, referees, or mercy. Every mistake was costly. Every failure could mean death. The word Krav Maga, in modern Hebrew, literally means contact combat. This name was not chosen for aesthetics or tradition, but for precision. The system promised no honor, enlightenment, or technical beauty. It promised something far simpler and far more valuable: to return home alive. But before it existed as a formal system, Krav Maga was merely a set of improvised solutions, created in response to escalating violence. Young Jewish men, often outnumbered and physically disadvantaged, needed to learn how to defend themselves quickly. It was in this context that a completely different combat mentality began to emerge. There was no room for complex techniques, rigid postures, or decorative movements. What worked stayed. Anything that failed was immediately discarded. This raw logic would later become the heart of Krav Maga. As the world moved toward the First World War, 1914 to 1918, racial and political tensions intensified. The war left Europe even more unstable, creating a perfect environment for the growth of extremist movements. Jewish communities became easy targets, blamed for economic crises and military defeats. It is in this context that the central figure in the history of Krav Maga emerges: Imrich Imi Lichtenfeld, a man who did not seek to create a martial art, but who would end up forever changing the way the world understands self-defense. But before becoming a military instructor, before Israel existed as a state, before Krav Maga was internationally recognized, Imi was just a young man trying to protect his family, his community, and himself. And that's exactly where the real story begins. Before Krav Maga existed as a system, method, or military doctrine, there was a man shaped by discipline, sport, real violence, and extreme choices. His birth name was Imrich Lichtenfeld, born on May 26, 1910, in the city of Budapest, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Shortly after, his family settled in Bratislava, a city that today belongs to Slovakia, but which at the time was part of the complex political mosaic of Central Europe. To understand Imi, one must understand the environment in which he grew up. Bratislava was a meeting point between Germanic, Hungarian, Slavic, and Jewish cultures. This diversity, which in theory should enrich society, has in practice turned into constant tension. Anti-Semitism was already present, although not institutionalized as it would be decades later with Nazism. Imi's father, Samuel Lichtenfeld, was a pivotal figure in her upbringing. Samuel was no ordinary citizen. He was a police chief, criminal investigator, and self-defense instructor. Furthermore, Samuel founded one of the first academies in the region focused on physical training, combat sports, and gymnastics, influenced by early 20th century European methods of body conditioning. It was under his father's tutelage that Imi came into contact with a concept that would become central to his life: fighting as a practical tool, not as a spectacle. Samuel taught that a technique only had value if it worked under real stress. No frills, no empty tradition. This mentality would be fully inherited by Krav Maga decades later. From a very young age, Imi demonstrated extraordinary athletic talent. He practiced gymnastics, Greco-Roman wrestling, boxing, and strength sports. In the 1930s, he competed at a high level, becoming a national champion in Greco-Roman wrestling and participating in international competitions. His body was strong, but more importantly, it was functional. Greco-Roman wrestling taught Imi body control, balance, leverage, and mastery of the center of gravity. Boxing gave him a sense of distance, timing, reflexes, and impact. Gymnastics built coordination, mobility, and body awareness. But none of that, in isolation, would prepare him for what was to come. True learning wouldn't happen on tatami mats, in rings, or in gyms. Imi's real school would be the streets of Bratislava. In the late 1930s, fascist and nationalist movements began to gain strength in the region. Paramilitary groups attacked Jewish neighborhoods, destroyed businesses, and assaulted people in the streets. The police often proved to be negligent or complicit. The law no longer protected everyone equally. It was in this context that Imi, still young, went from athlete to community defender. He organized self-defense groups to protect Jewish neighborhoods against coordinated attacks. These were not sporting fights. They were chaotic confrontations, multiple aggressors, improvised weapons, uneven terrain, and constant fear. It was there that Imi began to realize a brutal truth. Techniques that work in sports often fail on the street. Attacks that required excessive force, perfect balance, or a long execution time simply didn't work when someone was trying to kill you. Conversely, simple, direct, and instinctive actions had a higher success rate. Survival began to shape technique. Another crucial point emerged during this period: the morality of actual combat. Imi quickly understood that, in a life-or-death confrontation, there is no such thing as just or beautiful. There is only life or death. This understanding completely shattered the logic of the traditional martial arts of the time. Street experiences also taught something even more important. The best fight is the one that ends quickly. The longer a confrontation lasts, the greater the chances of new aggressors, weapons, or fatal mistakes emerging. This principle would become one of the pillars of Krav Maga. With the rise of Nazism and the signing of the Munich Agreement in 1938, the situation for Jews in Europe became untenable. Arrests, persecutions, and deportations intensified. Imi was placed on a wanted list by fascist groups. To remain meant death. In 1940, Imi made a definitive decision: to flee Europe. He boarded a rickety ship along with hundreds of other Jewish refugees attempting to reach Palestine, then under British mandate. The journey was long, dangerous, and marked by hunger, disease, and clashes with British authorities. During that journey, Imi almost died. He became seriously ill and needed treatment upon arrival. But he had survived. And that survival wasn't just physical, it was ideological. Everything she had experienced up to that point was beginning to condense into something bigger, still unnamed, but already with a purpose. He didn't know it yet, but in a few years he would be training soldiers, special forces, and shaping the combat system that would become official for an entire country. Before any structured method existed, before manuals or gradings, Krav Maga was born in an environment where making a mistake meant death. In Bratislava in the late 1930s, the collapse of social order was already visible. Fascist paramilitary groups, inspired by Nazi ideologies that were rapidly spreading across Central Europe, began to act with organized violence. These were not isolated fights. They were coordinated attacks with multiple aggressors, using sticks, improvised knives, chains, and even rudimentary firearms. Imi did not confront these groups alone. He organized community self-defense cells, composed of young Jewish men without formal training. This detail is crucial. Most were not athletes, fighters, or soldiers. They were merchants, students, ordinary workers. This imposed a clear limitation. The techniques needed to work for anyone, not just someone strong or experienced. It was in this context that Imi began to discard in practice everything that didn't work under extreme pressure. Sporting techniques from Greco-Roman wrestling, for example, required prolonged control of the opponent and constant hand-to-hand contact. In a scenario with multiple attackers, this was suicide. Complex movements, which required precise timing, would fail when fear took over the body. Adrenaline distorted perception, strength, and coordination. The street taught something that no academy could. Under real stress, the body doesn't do what is considered good. It does what is instinctive. This learning led Imi to observe universal patterns of human reaction: muscle stiffness, tunnel vision, loss of fine motor skills, and uncontrolled bursts of force. Instead of fighting against these natural reactions, he began to build techniques that took advantage of them. Another critical point was the realization that there were no rules. Attacks came from behind. Someone who had fallen to the ground was kicked. Weapons appeared out of nowhere. The concept of honor simply didn't exist. This destroyed any romanticization of the struggle. Imi also realized that many confrontations didn't start with punches, but with pushes, grabs, and verbal threats. The transition between psychological tension and physical violence was almost instantaneous. This demanded equally quick and direct responses. It was there that a principle emerged, still in embryonic form, that would become central to Krav Maga. Neutralize the threat in the shortest time possible, using maximum efficiency with the fewest possible movements. During these confrontations, Imi began to mentally record what worked. Direct blows to the eyes, throat, and genitals broke the attacker's initiative. Simple, short-line movements were more reliable than elaborate evasions. Simultaneous attacks on defense drastically increased the chance of survival. Staying on the ground was extremely dangerous. Getting up quickly was the absolute priority. These principles did not originate from philosophy. They originated from statistical survival. Another decisive factor was the improvised use of the environment. Bottles, stones, doors, walls, stairs. Everything could become a weapon or an obstacle. The notion that combat takes place in a controlled space simply didn't exist. The street was unpredictable, dirty, cramped, and unfair. Over time, Imi began to refine these observations and pass them on to the groups he trained. The training was simple, brutal, and realistic. No rituals, no uniforms. The focus was, recognize the danger quickly, act before the aggressor, create an opening escape. Here another fundamental element of Krav Maga emerges. The objective is not to win the fight, it is to survive and escape. This concept radically separates it from most traditional martial arts, which seek dominance, submission, or symbolic victory. As the violence escalated and the persecution of Jews intensified, the clashes became even more lethal. Many of Imi's comrades were arrested, wounded, or killed. Each loss reinforced the urgency of a system that would function under any circumstances. But there was a limit. Survival demanded escape. When Imi decided to leave Europe, he took with him not only a body scarred by violence, he brought with him a set of principles tested in the worst possible scenario. Knowledge that didn't yet have a name, but already had an identity. Imi Lichtenfeld's departure from Europe was no ordinary relocation. It was an escape. By 1940, the continent was already in flames. The Nazi machine was advancing, borders were closing, and the fate of the Jews was becoming increasingly clear. Imi boarded the ship Pencho, along with hundreds of refugees seeking to reach British-mandated Palestine. The ship was not prepared for the crossing. Mechanical failures, water shortages, and food shortages turned the journey into an extreme test of physical and psychological endurance. For months, Imi watched people fall ill, faint, and die. The ordeal reinforced something he already knew. Survival depends not only on strength, but on constant adaptation to chaos. When the ship sank in the Danube River, Imi still suffered serious injuries. Even so, he refused to give up. His body was broken, but his mind was already operating in an irreversible mode. Learn, adapt, survive. Upon finally arriving in Palestine, Imi was not a hero received with honors. He was a wounded refugee, without resources, in a land also living under constant tension. But that territory needed exactly the kind of knowledge he carried. In Palestine, Imi was introduced to the Haganah, a Jewish paramilitary organization responsible for defending local communities. The region was experiencing frequent conflicts, ambushes, armed attacks, and urban clashes. Unlike in Europe, Imi now found himself facing a military structure in formation. composed of ordinary people who needed to learn how to fight quickly. It was at this moment that his knowledge found a new purpose. Emi began training soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, defense against knives, batons, and multiple threats. The system didn't have a name yet, but it already had clear pillars: simplicity, controlled aggressiveness, and maximum efficiency. The commanders quickly noticed something unusual. The soldiers trained by Emi reacted better under stress. They panicked less. They made decisions faster. This is because the method didn't teach choreography, but instinctive responses trained under pressure. Gradually, what had been improvised began to take shape. Krav Maga was officially beginning to emerge. With the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 and the establishment of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, Emi was appointed chief instructor of hand-to-hand combat. At that moment, the system received a definitive name: Krav Maga, which in Hebrew means contact combat. The challenge now was enormous, training thousands of recruits in a short time, many of them without any physical preparation. The method needed to be standardized without losing its essence. Techniques were organized by scenario: close-range combat, armed threats, combat in confined spaces, standing defense, and ground defense. The philosophy became clear: neutralize the threat, create an opportunity, and survive. There was no room for vanity, personal styles, or old traditions. Anything that didn't work was discarded. Krav Maga has become a living, constantly evolving system, shaped by the realities of the battlefield. Unlike other martial arts, Krav Maga never sought spiritual enlightenment or abstract philosophical mastery. Its ethics were simple and brutal, to preserve the life of the practitioner. This led many critics to label him as excessively violent. But this violence was, in fact, targeted and strategic. Emi insisted that Krav Maga did not teach gratuitous aggression, but a response proportional to real danger. A knife attack required immediate neutralization. A multiple confrontation demanded escape. Morality lay in survival, not aesthetics. Another central principle was personal responsibility. The practitioner needed to understand when to fight, when to flee, and when to avoid. The real battle began before the first blow, in reading the environment and the aggressor's intentions. After retiring from the armed forces, Emi dedicated himself to adapting Krav Maga for civilians. Women, the elderly, teenagers, and security professionals began training in the system. This required adjustments, but did not compromise the principles. In the following years, Krav Maga spread to Europe, the United States, and Latin America. Police officers, special forces, and civilians began to adopt it as a realistic method of self-defense. Unlike traditional arts, it didn't require years to become functional. In weeks, the student already possessed basic survival tools. This accessibility accelerated its global expansion. With its popularization came distortions. Gyms transformed Krav Maga into a fitness product. Techniques were softened. Myths arose, promising invincibility. This generated legitimate criticism. But authentic Krav Maga never promised absolute victory. It always made it clear: there is no perfect system, only better than average preparation. Where the method remained true to its roots, realism, pressure, and adaptation, it continued to be effective. Emi died in 1998, but he left behind something rare: a system that doesn't belong to an ancient culture or a closed tradition, but to modern reality. Krav Maga is not an art of the past. It is a response to the present. His legacy lies not in monuments, but in ordinary people who manage to return home alive after an extreme situation. In an increasingly unpredictable world, Krav Maga remains true to its origins. It was born out of necessity, shaped by real violence, and survives because it works. With that, we conclude another chapter of our journey, but the adventure continues, as the world is full of styles, stories, and legends waiting to be discovered. And if you're not already following us, we're unlikely to see each other again. But if you are, know that here you'll discover all the martial arts ever taught around the world, each one and its origins. Martial Origins invites you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to give us that boost that only true warriors possess, and leave your comment below. Share this with a friend so they too can enter the world of martial arts. because perhaps the next video will reveal secrets that few imagine. Until the next journey.